Ethics will be on the agenda at the State House, and the governor promotes road projects. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Legislature's been out this week. It's in the middle of the 6-day veto session, but 3 more days next week. Here to talk with me about this, Jeff Rogers is back. He is State House Bureau Chief, Capitol News, Illinois. Welcome back, Jeff.
Thanks, Bernie.
And Dave Dahl is back. He is State House reporter for WTAX Radio Springfield and some other stations that he helps.
Thank you.
Welcome back. So I mentioned that ethics is going to be on the agenda. We've been talking about this because the first day of the veto session saw everybody go a little interested, kind of dove into this whole thing because Luis Arroyo, now a former member of the Illinois House, was indicted the first day, appeared in court having been arrested a few days earlier, but the news broke that Monday. And now next, I think it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the legislature's back. Governor Pritzker was talking to, of all groups, the Cook County Democratic Party the other night at a fundraiser or event, and said he was furious over the betrayal of public trust, and he's hoping for some reforms, as are Republicans. Jeff?
Well, obviously, the first week of the veto session was filled with talk about ethics and about different pieces of legislation that were proposed. And the week in between the 2 weeks of the veto session has been more of the same, more legislation proposed. We just had another one that was talked about today. So obviously that's going to be something that's a big piece of what they're talking about when they return next Tuesday. Kind of interesting, as you mentioned, the audience that Governor Pritzker was talking to the other night. And I just noted with interest the reporter's observation that as he talked about how furious he was about this, the audience continued to eat its hors d'oeuvres and drink its cocktails and just seemed to continue to clink, clink, clink the glasses and the silverware.
Well, that's kind of like some debates in the legislature.
Heard it all before.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But we'll see. But Dave, is anything going to happen this time? And we can talk about some of what the plans are. I mean, one of the things the governor wants is if you, I guess, have any lobbyist income to report that more fully, like apparently they do in the city of Chicago. And then some Republicans have a plan in part to say you can't lobby local governments if you're a member of the legislature, because that's what Arroyo was doing and that's what got him in trouble. Do you think we'll see some action in this last 3 days of the veto session?
Well, there wasn't a lot of action on it in the first 3 days, a lot of talk, and I expect a lot of pontificating. Whether there will be action, I don't know, they don't have much time to really do anything that hasn't already gone through a committee or one chamber in the first week. But it certainly gave everyone a lot to think about, and a lot of, no, speaking to this lapel, oh, you're not wearing a wire, are you? And some people
we found out, I guess, from the federal documents that was it Representative Arroyo, had been wearing a wire when he talked to a state senator and offered him $2,500.
Other way around.
Yeah, state senator wearing
a
wire. Thank you very much.
And Arroyo was trying to bribe him, according to authorities.
Right.
And some people found that whole line of conversation more amusing than others in terms of, oh, are you wearing a wire? It's hard to say that they're really going to get some kind of substantive crackdown in just 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But as I said, it'll give you people a lot to talk about and think about over the holidays and then when they come back after January.
Yeah, I mean, you had the governor even sort of putting the brakes on much happening over the veto session. He was talking more about the specific, maybe some specific legislation regarding lobbying that they can address in those 3 days. But I think when you're hearing that more on the Democrat side that there isn't a lot of talk about doing much in these 3 days, that probably means there isn't going to be a lot going on.
Okay,
but when you hear about it, and you mentioned with Arroyo in Chicago, when you hear about this stuff, well, I'm a lawmaker, but I'm also a lobbyist. People in other states, I mean.
Yeah. Well, there are oddly different jobs. I mean, I know you can still be a local mayor and a legislator, and I have seen that happen over many years. So there are some differentiations in who's where the question is, and obviously the Republicans whose plan includes that no legislator or their spouse should be able to lobby even a local government. When you are the local legislator, it's really hard, I guess, for a mayor or the member of the city council to tell you no if you want something for a local company.
Or walking out of the Capitol as a lawmaker one day and walking in the next day as a lobbyist.
Yeah, well, and that's the old revolving door thing, which we have
talked
seen a lot of that over time.
talked about.
Interestingly, and reports continue to come out, and I credit WBEZ Radio, public radio up in Chicago, with doing a story on this, but many former aides to House Speaker Michael Madigan have been part of Commonwealth Edison's Springfield lobbying corps. Some of those people are just in recent days, like former State Representative John Bradley from Southern Illinois, Marion, I think, being separated from that company, and these are generally contract lobbyists, not dedicated lobbyists. But it's just interesting. We don't exactly know where this whole investigation involving several tentacles of the federal government is going. But we had a top official of Commonwealth Edison step down recently. We've had some people who have lobbied for them, including somebody on the Chicago City Council, former state legislator, Mr. McLean from Quincy, have FBI show up at their doors and gather information. We don't know where any of this is going. Those people I just mentioned, not charged with anything, but there's an interesting nexus that's being built between Speaker Madigan and a large utility that serves providing electric service generally in the northern part of the state.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why there's a little trepidation on particularly on the Democrat side about doing too much at this point in terms of ethics reform, because they're waiting to see what all of this results in. And there's I think, in my opinion, a legitimate argument in that we got to see where all of this goes before we start addressing particular things, because we don't know. There's so many different directions that can go at this point.
I guess a broader question is, in any kind of legislative agenda, does this hurt the governor, that it's mostly Democrats under a spotlight right now, or is this business as usual in Illinois? I know we don't necessarily have a good answer to that. I just raised the question because can stuff get done when there's this cloud hanging around the State House?
Well, I think there's already some discussion that this might have an impact on the graduated tax amendment issue in the next election. So I think, there's some sort of, not necessarily guilt by association, but just simply association with the party, and that seems to be where a lot of all of this is focused, is on the Democrat side. That's got to be a concern, which is why I think he's out there trying to get across that he's furious and upset with these things.
And trying to fix things. And of course, the legislature has already passed, as you mentioned, Jeff, to put on next November's ballot the question, should we change the Constitution to allow a graduated income tax instead of the flat tax? And with the rates that the Democratic legislature has passed, and they say, most people, the overwhelming majority of people will pay the same or less, but the top 3% will pay more. They would raise perhaps $3 billion a year more in state revenue with a graduated income tax with new rates. And it's very important to the governor to get this done, and Republicans are virtually united opposed to it. Certainly the Republicans in the legislature. So, and Dave, we're going to be seeing lots of advertisements about that. And
both ways.
They will start pretty soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of raising revenue, the legislature, as part of the first session that Governor Pritzker had in office with a solidly Democratic legislature, they passed, in addition to other things, a $45 billion capital plan over 6 years that included doubling the gasoline tax and dedicating some other taxes and fees, and I believe gambling and marijuana revenue, to do some construction projects across the state. The governor has been places including Mundelein and Skokie and Chicago, announcing new things, and the state fair is even getting some largesse. Dave Dahl, so I think it was $500,000 for roads that are being fixed right now.
Yeah, just to start off with $500,000, and then in the spring another $2.5 million, and it needs it. Infrastructure at the fair has long been neglected, and thanks in no small part to former Governor Rauner and his wife. The Coliseum is back in shape. We can use that. And the fairgrounds has really been a poster child, if you will, for deferred maintenance in Illinois.
Right, and just a few years ago, I think Pat Quinn was governor when the electrical system went out on the fairgrounds for a while. It didn't affect a fair, but they had to spend millions of dollars to, rewire the place, and that at least is up to date. Well, something of interest to state employees, Marc Janus is the name. He's a former state employee himself. He is the person who took a case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court that basically said if you are in a public sector union, which he was, but you don't want to be part of the union, you no longer, going into the future, have to pay the agency dues, which is non-member dues for the services the union provides, or what the unions call fair share dues. Pay your fair share because we're negotiating for you, we'll help you in disciplinary cases. But Marc Janus recently lost a next phase of his court battles. Why don't you tell us about it, Jeff?
Yeah, well, Mr. Janus was trying to recover, I believe it was $3,000 in some of the fair share fees that he had paid toward the union. The court, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal court, ruled that the union at that point, when they were collecting those fees from Mr. Janus and others, were acting in good faith because that was the law at the time. So they said no in terms of going back and getting that money.
Right. It's pretty clear that Mr. Janus and his allies who have been representing him, I think it's Liberty Justice Center,
Yes.
is one of the organizations that kind of backs what they would say is individual rights. Right to work, I believe, is part of the philosophy. We'll be taking this probably to the U.S. Supreme Court,
They've
which,
said
as
that
we
they
know,
will,
has a couple of new members in the last couple of years, and so we're not exactly sure where this
It's
will
really
go
hard
as
to
far
tell
as back pay.
where that court is on anything at this point. It will be interesting to see if there's maybe a little bit of a change because of the new members on the court.
Okay. Well, we will see where that goes, but generally there's more labor peace between the state and the administration now. Of course, Governor Pritzker likes unions and says so. Governor Rauner said that public sector unions and government union bosses were the biggest problem in state government because of the costs, he said, they added to the process. That rhetoric is now still around, but certainly not from the governor's office.
No, very different.
That is very clear. Another change coming in state government, Lloyd Carmeier has been a justice of the Illinois Supreme Court since being elected in 2004. He is age 79. He has just completed a term as Chief Justice. Ann Burke took over from Chicago, and he says he will leave the court as of December 2020, which means we have set up in I think it's the 5th District, far southern Illinois, and much of the southern part of the state. They haven't redistricted the Supreme Court districts in like 50 years, but it still covers most of southern Illinois. We're going to have that race, and that could be a barn burner.
Well, I mean, back in 2004, that at the time was the most expensive judicial race in U.S. history, if I recall correctly. So I think you've probably got something like that on your hands again.
Right. It is an interesting place because southern Illinois, if you look at those maps of like red and blue in perhaps a race for president, there are lots of lightly populated areas, but heavily red. Very territory where President Trump is very popular and Republican politics is very popular. Then you have the Metro East is included in this area around the Illinois side of the St. Louis region. You've got a lot of Democratic strength there. And obviously we have elected judges, and Dave, it just looks like they're going to pour money into this place again.
Well, why not? It's whether they're appointed or elected, it's heavily watched which way they lean and which party could be favored. There's a lot riding on it by virtually everybody involved in the court system. Yeah,
there have been talk over the years of should Illinois go from elected judges to appointed judges. Of course, there are arguments on both sides. Elected lets the people be involved, but it also lets special interests get involved and lets the parties get involved. If you go appointed, then whoever is the governor, even though the Senate might have to, agree if that we change the Constitution to do that. If there's a Democratic governor, Republicans might not like it, and the opposite. So I don't think there's any movement in Illinois to change this. We're just going to continue to see contested judicial elections, but one for the Supreme Court, of course, gets the craziest just because of the stakes and the money.
And if anybody thinks that the appointment process in that prevents it from becoming political, all you have to do is look at the U.S. Supreme Court and see that it's happened that way.
Are there politics involved in that?
Just a little bit,
okay.
yeah.
or some hearings can get rather heated, as I recall.
Just a hair.
Or
yeah.
lack of hearings for a year, as we saw recently.
Well, that's also true. And President Obama tried to get Merrick Garland, formerly of Illinois, named to the court, and it never went anywhere. So, let me go. On a federal issue, there's been some interesting movement in kind of south and western Illinois. Congressman John Shimkus, who used to represent Springfield under a former map, but is from Collinsville, Illinois, and when he was elected in 1996, he said he would only serve, I believe it was 12 years, but then George Bush the younger, when he was president, and Denny Hastert, the speaker from Illinois at the time, convinced him that the party needed him, and he stayed in, and he's been in more than 20 years now. Said he was going to step down. There's been some uncertainty in the Republican Party who's going to try to take over that district that was overwhelmingly won as one of these southern Illinois areas by President Trump. Congressman Shimkus was recently asked to reconsider, took the weekend, and then said he's not running anyways. So kind of interesting that, but it looks like while this district might go away, some people think, or be combined into others after the next census, we don't exactly yet know who the next candidates will be.
And this after saying that he was stepping off the Trump train.
True. He took himself off of being one of the co-chairs of the Trump re-election campaign in Illinois, which is interesting. Of course, if he was now running for Congress again, that might be more interesting if he got somebody to run against him. We did just hear an announcement this late in the week that Kent Gray, who is of Leland Grove, which is one of those tiny internal suburbs of Springfield, and he was the head of the Trump campaign in Illinois for a time back in 2016, but he also recently, because of a conflict that came out of his divorce case and what he told the judge or didn't tell the judge about his taxes, lost his law license for a year, but he does advance work for, has done it, I think, for the president, certainly does it for Vice President Pence still around the country and world, says that he is running for the John Shimkus seat.
Which I think makes 6 Republicans at this point who have announced.
Is it that many?
I think
haven't kept, because of the non-Springfield thing, I haven't kept up enough.
I believe it's 6 on the Republican side and 2 on the Democrat, so that's going to be an interesting primary for sure.
We will be certainly watching that. Speaking of time, let's talk about daylight savings time just a little bit, because State Senator Andy Manar of Macoupin County said that there was like a school class that came up with a bill to end the switch back and forth of time in Illinois, and he said just after the switch to winter time again, off daylight savings time, he was apparently ready to bring it for a vote during the veto session. What do we think is going to happen on this one?
I would say probably nothing is going to happen with that one, would be my guess, because right now it seems like there is some question about whether Illinois can do that on its own without some federal help, in terms of this, essentially the Fed establishing a law that allows Illinois to do that. So I think that's going to have to get cleared up. Honestly, with all of the things that are on the plate for next week, I don't know that daylight saving time will be a huge issue for them to deal with, so I would expect that not much happens with that.
I agree with Jeff.
Well, there you go. There is something out there called Scott's Law, and the governor has talked about it more than he wishes he would have had to during his less than a year in office. It is the law named after, I believe, a police officer or state trooper.
Chicago fire.
Chicago firefighter who was killed while responding to a scene. And we have had, I believe it's 3 members of the state police killed in traffic accidents this year. We have had something like 26 state police cars hit as they are on highways. There were just a chain reaction where 2 people are injured and taken to the hospital. I don't believe their injuries were serious in the Chicago area just recently. So the governor has said that speaking at funerals of state police officers is among the things that have surprised him the most. He has said, what do you think of your job? The emotion that comes out because he sees the families and he knows how dangerous these jobs are is there. So I'm sure we're going to see more talk about this from the state as far as safety is concerned.
Yeah, and they passed the law that toughened the penalties for violating Scott's law, but I think really the bigger thing to combat that is public awareness. I'm not sure that the fines make a big difference when you're behind the wheel and you're not thinking about that necessarily, but you might be thinking about it more when you hear more about the number of accidents and the number of deaths that there have been, because it's been a bad year for that.
Well, and they're happening for no reason at all.
People are just either falling asleep or not paying attention as they do. I'm going to switch to something federal just for a minute, because impeachment seems to be going hotter and heavier in D.C., and I'm just wondering if we think that will have much, if any, of an effect on anything going on in Illinois, just because it's such a big story nationally.
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's going to affect turnout, obviously. I mean, not that you need a lot to motivate yourself to get out to vote in November in a presidential election, and when you've got the graduated tax amendment on that too, I think that's going to drive people. But it will probably drive certain people who maybe that's an extra motivation to either go out and vote for or against the president in that case.
I think some of it will depend on who the candidate is for the Democrats. I saw somewhere, and I forget where, that there may not be enough people all in for Trump to help him win, but add them to the people that really aren't fond of any of the Democratic candidates, and that'll be a force to be reckoned with.
Right.
If I'm a Democrat, maybe I should change my name to not Trump.
Yeah, and of course the Illinois primary is not until March 17th. It's going to come after Iowa. It's going to come after a lot of other contests across the country, the early primaries and caucuses. Obviously President Trump is going to be the Republican nominee, barring some unforeseen movement. Even, nobody expects him to be removed through impeachment because of the strength of the Republican Party in the U.S. Senate. Democratic candidates could come to Illinois and do some campaigning if they still need this state on St. Patrick's Day, which is when we're going to have our primary, because I think various people in the state are for various people in that Democratic field, which continues to whittle down.
I mean, I know the polls have been showing that Joe Biden nationally leads, but when you look at the setup of the primaries and you see Iowa and New Hampshire first, where Biden's not doing particularly strong, that sets up the possibility that this could be going a little bit longer than maybe we think right now, just because of the order of things. So maybe when Illinois comes around, there's still a pretty strong contest happening.
We'll see what happens. I think in the Obama years we moved our primary back into February at that time, and that was to help the favorite son, Obama from Illinois. Now we're back to March. So often the contest is decided by the time it gets to Illinois. Obviously we don't know that yet this time around. I'm going to go back to the State House just a little, but there was a lot of talk going into this veto session of will there be restrictions on vaping, and obviously the industry, the people who sell even the various flavors of vaping products have made their case, at a hearing at the State House to say, don't put us out of business.
I just heard on the radio Thursday afternoon, Juul was suspending everything except tobacco flavor and I think menthol.
Juul, that's Juul.
Right.
The company that is the big vaping products.
I interrupted you, but I want to throw in that late news.
Well, interesting. And, that may be a situation where pressure from states just talking about it, like Illinois, is making the industry move forward. Plus, obviously, the illnesses that, have keep getting reported about vaping, even though some of those may be or the big suspicion is that that's like if you're using a hemp or marijuana product, a CDB or whatever, that may be only on the black market for vaping purposes.
Well, it's not lost on me, and I may have mentioned it here before, that when everyone was smoking, it was like mandatory that you smoked, and it was 60 years before it really sunk in that maybe it wasn't very good for you. And it seems to me that with the e-cigarette, people are trying to get out in front of it and not have it be 60 years before we realize it's no good. And the vape shops say, our product's perfectly safe, it's the THC that's bad, and it's the black market that's bad. Is vaping safe? I honestly don't know.
Right. Well, I'm not trying it, but that's just, that's just me. I'm not a smoker either. What can I tell you?
I mean, I think probably the biggest effect on all of this legislatively this year was including that in the smoke-free law that is out there. So, you know, you're outside, you go to a show or something like that, and people are vaping because they're allowed to do that. Well, now they're not going to be able to.
Not indoors. Just
Right.
It's just like tobacco now.
Yep.
And has the governor? Is that to the governor, that bill? I know that there was some action taken on in the legislature. We'll see what happens with that, but I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah, I don't think
if
it
it's
has.
not.
Yeah,
Right.
not yet.
Okay. The other thing that's been talked about a lot is, and the governor had said he was for this, is combining all of the downstate police pension systems, and there are like 300 some, and all of the into one big pool of money to be managed, and they said they could make a better return. Similar with the more than 300 for downstate firefighter pension systems. And again, the statewide police organization, or at least one of them, says bad idea. Statewide firefighter organization says good idea. Are we going to see action this week, or do we have any idea on where that one's going right now?
Doesn't seem to me to be a 3-day thing. I think I'll probably push and pull on it and maybe get to it the end of May.
And
Yeah, I think if we were going to see something happen with this veto session, there probably would have been some movement on it last week, and there wasn't. So I think Dave's right on that.
well, it's a big idea. That one, I think, may, unlike ethics, if they do anything, you know, they want some headlines on this one. Maybe they'll wait till the spring to take a closer look. Well, with that, it's about time for us to say goodbye for the week. Jeff Rogers and Dave Dahl, thanks for your help. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.